Welcome to the Ad Nauseam podcast, where classical gourmands everywhere can finally get their fill. Join us for a delectable discussion of Greco-Roman civilization stretching from the Minoans and Mycenaeans through the Renaissance and right down to the present. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here are your hosts, Dr. David Noe and Dr. Jeff Winkle.
Welcome, listeners, to episode 197 of the Ad Nauseam podcast. My name is Dr. Jeffrey T. Winkle. I'm down here in the bunker, Parnassus Central, with my good friend and excellent co-host, Dr. David C. Noe.
You need a cough drop or something?
I do, actually. I have one. I need another one.
Okay.
Yeah. How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing really well, yes.
Yeah?
I'm not as professionally, what's the word I'm looking for, attired as last time. It's more of an off day, taking it easy a little bit, but still engaged in the classics. That's my goal.
Are you on your way to or from the gym?
No, not today.
Okay.
No, typically Monday is a Gaim day, but I'm not going to make it today. How about you?
I'm doing well. I just came from a couple of classes this morning. I taught some classical archaeology, where I was talking about the relationship between the Persian Wars and the Periclean building programs.
Oh, fantastic.
Without the one, you don't get the other.
That's correct.
Yep.
The Persians have to destroy the archaic temple, mostly terracotta, before Pericles, can rebuild it in fabulous marble.
Indeed. Like a phoenix rising from the ashes.
That is a great story.
Yeah, so that's been a lot of fun. Had some students give an excellent presentation on the Battle of Thermopylae.
Very good.
And then in religion, we're kind of shifting from Eastern polytheism to Western monotheism.
Fascinating.
Yep, good stuff.
So the T in Jeffrey T. Winkle stands for?
Trilingual.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Fascinating. You mean the Hebrew, the Greek, the Latin?
I would say the English, the Greek, and the Latin. My Hebrew is hopeless.
I see. But if we're going to be talking about one Paul of Tarsus today, right, then maybe he is going to be a little bit trilingual. I guess that's part of the story that's
part of
developing.
The story, part of the argument. Yes, exactly. And how about that C for you?
Well, the C this week stands for computation.
What's going on there?
Well, this is not something I do myself, although the Latin verb computare means to reckon, right, to sum up. And so we're going to be looking at an article by one Anna Mahoney, who is a brilliant computer scientist as well as an expert in Greek and Latin.
So that's a rare combo.
Yes. Well, not as rare as you might think. In some sense, we got David Packard, right, who gave a huge amount of money to the humanities based on the success of Packard Bell.
Oh, yeah. Right.
So Mahoney wrote this brilliant article, The Forms You Really Need to Know, about the study of Greek and Latin. We've referenced it many times on the show, and today we're going to give it a full treatment.
Excellent.
So
Look forward to it.
We're going to combine in the first part of the episode Alexander Souter's article from 1911, Did St. Paul Speak Latin, with Anne Mahoney's article from much later. In fact, it's from 2004, if memory serves.
Yeah.
The forms you really need to know.
So Anne would say that if indeed Paul spoke Latin,
right,
I've got the line on which forms he probably would have used.
Yes, exactly. That's right. I thought, is there some way to combine the title for these two articles, and kind of in the same way that Hermes and Aphrodite, when they had offspring, it was hermaphrodites.
Yes. Yeah.
So could it be Sahoney? Would that be?
Oh, I see.
We put Souter and Mahoney together,
or Mahouter.
Mahouter. Right. I don't know if either of those really.
Yeah. No, I think we should keep them separate.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. This looks great. I'm very eager to dig into. We're gonna do Souter first, right?
That's
Souter?
correct. Souter. I believe it's Souter.
Okay.
Yeah. So Alexander Souter first, and then in the second half of the program, Anne Mahoney.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have a shout out this week. We're still waiting on some of those as they develop, but we wanted to front load what we're hoping will be episode 200.
200, yes, exactly. So, I think as we requested on the previous episode, we would love it if we could get some of our loyal listeners to record themselves.
Right.
And what do we want them to say?
I don't know, in 30 seconds to a minute, or length to be determined. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. I'm out here. I'm keeping the flame lit.
Yeah.
I'm teaching some Greek. It's kind of like an extended shout out, but it also allows you, the listener, to tell us what you think about what we're up to here on the program.
Yeah.
And then we will respond. So there could be some mutual roasting, I suppose.
Definitely, right.
So you always roast the ones you love, right?
That's true. So, I mean, it could be about the show itself.
Right.
But like you just said, if you want to talk a little bit about what you're up to, I'm always interested in how people cross paths with the classics.
That's right.
So it can be really anything you want. Just keep it tight.
Yeah, it could be questions too, right? Could be questions. Say you've listened to a particular episode and you want to know, well, what about this? Can we extend the insight a little bit?
Yeah.
And so we were thinking about calling it hot takes and talkage.
Okay.
Instead of hot cakes and sausage, where you give us your hot takes, and then we kind of respond. And if we get enough of those, we'll put together episode 200 on that basis, rather than what we did for episode 100, which was the Cheesy Clip Show.
Cheesy Clip Show, yes.
That's right.
Yeah, I like this idea, and I hope we can get some response. If we don't, we'll come up with something else. That's okay.
So record the audio into your iPhone, your Android, whatever the case may be. Doesn't need to be high quality audio.
Nope.
And attach it to an email and send it to dave@adnauseam.com.
Yep.
Do not forget the V.
Yeah.
And we're going to put together the 200th episode on that basis.
Sounds great. All right, Dave, let's dig in.
All right. So we start out with the man himself, Alexander Souter. And we're going to give you a little bit of a biography of this famous classical scholar whom you may not have heard of before we look at the claims in his little article from 1911, Did St. Paul Speak Latin? So, Jeff, give us just the basics of this man, Alexander Souter. Who was he? What did he do?
He was Scottish. He was a biblical scholar. He lived from 1873 to 1949. He's been, I know that for you personally, some of his works have continued to be very useful.
Absolutely. Yeah, so he died in 1949, which was the year that my father was born. So although there's no particular closeness, I'm not suggesting, but this is a recent scholar, right? If you think about, the history of classical scholarship, which is a fascinating subject, we stand a long way from some of these characters, a long way, but not from Souter. He's relatively recent. So he was considered a pillar of early Christian textual scholarship. Like you said, born in 1873 in Perth, Scotland. Have you been to Scotland?
I have. I've been to Edinburgh, but not much else.
I haven't been past Edinburgh either. No further north.
I loved Edinburgh, though.
I liked it, too.
Yeah.
He died January 17 in Oxford, England. His specialty, New Testament textual criticism. So he studied at the University of Aberdeen. And he graduated with first-class honors in classics. So that's a good start.
Very good start, yep.
Then he moved on to Cambridge, where he went to Christ's College, and he continued his classical studies and fell under the influence of the great textual critic, F.J.A. Hort. Now, Hort is one of the pairs that put together the Westcott and Hort Greek New Testament. And this had a profound effect on Souter's own study. He was drawn to the study of the New Testament and its reception. So what is the critical reading of the New Testament? There are some, 16,000 plus manuscripts of the New Testament that have survived. So many of them. A famous manuscript of Catullus is actually a palimpsest of the text of the New Testament, right?
Yeah.
Because you would scrub off the classical author, in this case Catullus, and on top of it you would write something from the Gospel of Mark.
Right.
Because paper was so expensive, writing materials were really costly.
So Souter was instrumental in kind of establishing kind of the critical text of the Greek New Testament.
Yes, although it's a highly competitive field with many different individuals seeking to contribute to the securing of the text.
Yeah.
And I don't know the extent to which Souter's New Testament has gained a lot of favor as opposed to, say, the work of Nessel-Aland or Westcott and Hort and some others.
Yeah.
I have used Souter's text to teach Greek New Testament extensively because I like his readings and I really like some of the other works that he has come up with that we'll talk about in just a moment. After being at Cambridge, he was a professor of humanity in Latin, where he returned to Scotland at the University of Aberdeen, and he stayed there until 1911.
When he wrote this article.
That's right. So Professor of Humanity, Professor of Humanity was the traditional Scottish title for the Latin chair. So all of these universities, they have like the Regius professorship in Greek, so it's by the king's appointment.
Yes.
And the Regius professorship in Latin in the UK system. These are really prestigious posts, and Souter was on board for those.
And then he went on to Oxford.
That's correct. Yep, where he eventually died. So can you talk a little bit about his first work here that we have in the list, the Novum Testamentum Graecae of 1910?
Yes. So this was Souter's critical edition of the Greek New Testament, based on the work of Westcott and Hort, but incorporated new manuscript evidence that had come to light. For decades, it was a standard textbook used by students, especially in the UK. So if our listeners are not familiar, the number of manuscripts of the New Testament dwarf anything coming from the kind of the pre-Christian or non-Christian canon.
That's right. I mean,
thousands.
Exactly. Yeah. So even the manuscripts of Homer, numerous as they are, they don't even come close to the number of New Testament manuscripts. And for some authors, like the aforementioned Catullus, we have one exemplar.
Right.
That's
exactly. So the work that would go into establishing a critical text by looking at all of these things next to each other it's mind-boggling.
Yes, and that's because they don't agree, right?
Yeah.
That is, there are these tiny variations. Does the article ta come before the article to or after the article to?
Yeah.
It's my conviction, based on not deep study like Souter, but some study, that the text of the New Testament is incredibly secure, more secure than many of the classical authors that are seldom questioned. Nevertheless, there are these slight variations. They almost never affect meaning.
Yeah.
An example would be perhaps John chapter 8, the woman caught in adultery, or the end of the Gospel of Mark, Mark 16. Are these legitimate parts of the text?
Right.
Or not? But other than a few instances, they almost never affect meaning. They're just the tiniest errors in transcription.
Yeah.
Where someone's copying and maybe they got something wrong.
Yeah. You know that some people probably nearly or actually came to blows over a Yoda subscript.
They still do?
They still do.
Yes, they absolutely do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was 1910. 1912, he wrote a popular account of his work on the New Testament called The Text and Canon of the New Testament. I haven't read the whole of this. I'm about a third of the way through it. I read it kind of slowly because it's dense, right? It's dense. So this book was a concise and masterful summary of the state of the field and was an essential introduction for generations of theology students. So how does one collate a text? Where did we get the text of the New Testament? Souter is an early authority on this.
Yes. And then he writes towards the end of it, was published right at the end of his life.
That's right.
This glossary of later Latin to 600 AD, which just before we switched the mics on, you were waxing rhapsodic about this work.
This is an incredible work.
What makes it so important, or what makes it so good?
You know, when you come into classics, as you and I did, and we're trying to master Caesar and the indirect statement, and we're trying to master the supine in Cicero and whatever it is that Virgil and Ovid are doing, right? That's a task in itself.
Yeah.
And it's a huge task. And I'm still engaged in trying to gain some mastery of those authors. But of course, the Latin language wasn't static, right? Although the forms stayed relatively stable, vocabulary changed.
Yeah.
And as the march of time went on, by 600 AD, right, the Latin language has expanded considerably. It's off the Italian peninsula. It's all over the Mediterranean. And there have been some monumental authors like your own Apuleius, right?
That's right.
Later on, Augustine, Cyprian. These gentlemen contributed a massive amount to the corpus of Latin works, and they used words with somewhat different meanings than the Golden Age authors.
Yeah, so I have to imagine, a lot of the work that you do on later Latin authors, well past 600 AD.
That's right.
This has got to be a very important work in kind of demonstrating some of those transitions.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And Souter has a real knack for capturing the meaning of some of these words and presenting them in an idiomatic fashion. So some have said it's his most enduring and important work, his magnum opus.
Yeah.
So it goes from the period of the Church Fathers, about 180 AD, which may be maybe the death of Irenaeus of Lyon, down to 600. So intended to supplement the Oxford Latin Dictionary, which is the standard.
Yeah.
And the final work that I would like to mention before we get to a little bit of Souter's legacy, as well as the article itself, is a work published in 1917. Now, this is available in PDF. It's free. I don't know if there is a reprint, but there ought to be. A Pocket Lexicon to the Greek New Testament. Oxford, 1917. And if you want to learn how to read the New Testament rapidly, that is, you want to be able to, catch the meanings of words. You're not looking for a deep scholarly dive. You just want to get some speed. then this volume is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So I use it quite routinely. I just want to give a tiny little sample here. This is from page 5 of the lexicon, and he lists this word, agrupnia. So the state of being awake, and then in parentheses, at night.
At night?
Yeah. So being awake during the night, right? Because you're supposed to be awake during the day.
Yes.
Right? Then 2 entries down from that, he has the noun agoge, which we see in words like pedagogia, right? Agoge, he's very concise. Leading. It means leading, semicolon, hence mode of life or conduct. So there in 6 words, he has summarized a whole world of scholarship and idiomacy on the meaning of the word agoge. And the pocket lexicon, it's small, it's concise. If you want to learn to read the New Testament quickly, right, rapidly, you can't go wrong with this particular work.
Excellent. And you said that you can find this for free, right?
Oh, yeah. The PDF is available all over the place. I don't know if there are any reprints, but there ought to be. So it's also, he manages to pack some dense learning in there. So just one more example, right beneath agrupnia, he gives the verb ago. So not only does he list the 3 most common meanings, to lead, especially in the first person plural, it means to depart in the subjunctive, and to hold or to keep, but he also includes 2 scriptural references, Mark 1:38 and Acts 19:38. So it's very well put together. It's a brilliant work.
Yes. Now, my question is, if you print up the PDF, can you still fit it in your pocket?
I don't think so, probably. You'll have to do some hole punching, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I'm blessed to have 2 hardbacks that I inherited from previous classical scholars.
Oh, man, fantastic.
Yeah, tiny little ones. I could share one with you if you'd want.
I'd love to see it.
So what about some of his scholarly significance and legacy? What do they say about that before we get to the article?
Well, clearly he was a transitional figure, right?
Yes.
He kind of smoothed the path between some of these older, maybe kind of old school scholars and later 20th century scholars, and making things more accessible both for other scholars and students too, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
But like the best of popularizers, if it's fair to call him that, he didn't ever sacrifice his learning, right?
Yeah.
He brought to bear into his somewhat more popular work, like the Lexicon of Later Latin, tremendous erudition and exhaustive research. So you have to have an eye to the students if you're going to write something that will help them read Augustine and later authors.
Yeah.
So we all ought to be very grateful for the work he did there.
Yes.
Same goes for the pocket lexicon of Greek New Testament that we've been talking about. So he has some enduring reference works. Textual criticism of the Greek New Testament has advanced, most scholars would say, and the Nestle-Aland editions, which I believe are in the 28th or 29th printing.
That's the one I have.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a nice blue hardcover. Generally considered to be more advanced than Souter, but you know the advancements can be very minor sometimes.
Right.
Especially if you're in edition number 28.
Yeah,
right?
I don't know all the dot connecting here, but I imagine that without Souter you wouldn't have the
That's right.
the Nestle-Aland.
No.
Yeah.
He was instrumental in some of that. So all things told, right, we can be very grateful for the ability to stand on the shoulders of giants who have come before us.
Yes.
So are we ready for the article?
Let's do it.
All right. So this comes from a journal called The Expositor. It's the 8th series, Volume 1, Issue 4, April 1911. So about 3 years before the start of World War I.
Right. So things are rumbling in Europe.
That's right.
It hasn't spilled over into the horrors yet.
But still lots of room for the exchange of scholarship on the international stage.
Yep.
So, Jeff, you want to read the very first sentence or sentences of this article to set the stage?
Sure. So, Souter writes, "The question whether St. Paul spoke Latin or not is one which, like most questions connected with the New Testament, may have been the subject of a special discussion somewhere, but if it has, I am unaware of the fact. And I think that in any case, the matter is of sufficient interest to deserve a fresh consideration."
I like that. You know what? If he were alive today, Alex, we would get him on the podcast.
Yeah.
Because how many times have I said something, both on the show and in the classroom, like this? There must be some German dissertation somewhere
right.
on this specific point.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's one of the things that I learned in graduate school. Every important philological question, some 19th century polymath, wrote 8 volumes on it.
Yes.
In German.
Yes. When I was in graduate school, my professor, Bob Wallace, he said that kind of the first rule of classic scholarship is that if you think you have a new and revolutionary idea, just remember 12 people have already had the same
That's
idea.
right. So we had the Encyclopedia, the Polyvisova, right? You remember that one?
Yep.
And then there was the smaller Poly, Der Kleine Poly, the little Poly. So it was so big, so much, and it's not finished. They had to condense it further.
Yeah.
It was very comforting for me to hear Alexander Souter say here, if it has been, I am unaware of the fact, and hey, in any case, the matter is of sufficient interest to deserve fresh consideration.
I mean, I love just the immediate kind of the colloquial tone.
Yes.
I mean, it's not dumbed down, but he's saying, this is what I possibly don't know.
Correct.
But doesn't matter.
This is
interesting. Let's take a look.
Yep. Yeah. Forge ahead.
Yep.
Then he says, the existence of undisputed epistles written in semi-colloquial Greek is adequate evidence that he spoke Greek. And the Acts narrative shows that he spoke Aramaic. So you may know that not all of the Pauline epistles are accepted by critical scholars as authentically by the hand of Paul.
Right.
So I learned, within the last decade that many scholars don't think Ephesians is legitimate, although I do. And I'm not so concerned about whether, as Paul is dictating to one of his scribes, maybe Tychicus or Epaphroditus, if they take a little bit of a liberty under the inspiration of the Spirit to say things in not exactly the way that Paul would have said them.
Yeah.
I think this is enough to explain some stylistic differences.
Right.
Because the standards for originality are different today than they were in antiquity.
Indeed, right. So those kinds of criticisms are almost exclusively on stylistic grounds and not not saying, well, Paul wasn't in Ephesus or anything like that.
Occasionally there are things like that, but they're mostly on stylistic grounds. So it's a good starting point, right? Paul if it's Paul, he expressed this idea differently in another letter, they would say.
Yeah.
To me, that's not a very conclusive counter-argument to his authorship.
Right.
But in any event, he certainly wrote some, Alexander Souter is saying, in terms of the critical background. He certainly wrote a number of letters in what he calls semi-colloquial Greek.
Yes. Now, I do have a kind of one issue
Please.
here that, and I'm curious of your point of view on this. So he talks about how Paul clearly knew Greek, wrote in Greek,
right,
but also spoke Aramaic.
Correct.
And the footnote points us to Acts 21 verse 40.
That's correct. I'm right there right now.
In which he says that he speaks to a large crowd. But I'm looking at the Greek text right now, and he's speaking Ebraidi. He's
That's
speaking
right.
Hebrew.
Yes. Yes. Poles deseges genomenes.
Yes.
And so forth.
But as I understand, I mean, Hebrew and Aramaic are
not the same.
Not the same. I'm just wondering why Souter he uses Aramaic here and not Hebrew.
Because I believe that the word, the Hebrew tongue, Hebraidi dialecto, as you said from Acts 21:40, was a common description of Aramaic at the time, because it is also a Semitic language.
Yeah.
And the Hebrew of the Old Testament was not commonly spoken, but used as in the time of Christ, but was used as a tool for research.
Ah, okay.
So Christ and the apostles would have spoken Aramaic, and Souter wants to know, did he also speak Latin? Clearly Greek and Aramaic, but also Latin?
Right.
That's the question.
So just to clear this up, if in Acts where it's reported Paul is speaking to a crowd, he would not have been speaking in the scholarly
That's
Hebrew.
correct. No,
right.
Definitely not.
Gotcha. Yep.
So Souter goes on. This is page 337, where the article begins. There is enough evidence to suggest that he could also speak the third of the languages in the inscription above the cross, namely Latin. Now, I remember, Jeff, back when we were doing completing an episode a long time ago on Necropolis Now, which was your visit to the part underneath the Basilica of the Vatican, that you said we should do an episode at some point on the tri-title over the cross.
Yes, exactly, the so-called titulus crucis. And it's a fascinating relic. And most scholars who are interested in these kinds of things dismiss it as a fake.
Okay. It's recorded in the Gospels, right? It's
recorded in the Gospels, and I mean, not all the Gospels say the same thing, but at least I want to say two of them say that it said on the title above Jesus, it said that this is Jesus, King of the Jews, in three languages,
right?
In Aramaic, in Greek, and also in Latin.
That's right.
And there is this partial artifact in a church in Rome called the Church of Santa Croce in Jerusalem, Holy Cross in Jerusalem. In their reliquary, they have this small board and it has partially those three that phrase in all three languages.
Right.
Yeah. It's really interesting that in all of them are written from right to left.
Yes, boulostrophodon.
Yeah, right. So
yeah. Wait, that's not exactly boulostrophodon, lest I get a corrigendum. But right to left is right to left, and then left back to right, and right back to left.
Yes,
it's close.
Right, but the idea is that it was written that way for a Hebrew or an Aramaic speaking or reading audience which would have been read and wrote from right to left.
Interesting.
And which is a kind of a small piece of evidence for its possible authenticity.
Right. It's in the realm of Shroud of Turin kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yep.
So, the same page, I like the way that Souter phrases it. He says there is enough evidence to suggest. So he's not going to start out saying it's absolutely conclusive.
Right.
But as the article goes along, it builds in strength. And he adds more bits of evidence. So, continuing, he says, in Italy during the greater part of the 1,000 years preceding the birth of Christ, the spoken languages were the Italic dialects, of which the most famous was Latin, which ultimately killed all the others, and Greek, spoken in the southern part of the country known as Magna Graecia, right? So more Greeks living in southern Italy than in mainland Greece.
Yeah.
Which is always a shocking factoid to share with students.
Right.
We see from the comedies of Plautus, written towards the end of the 3rd century and in the early part of the 2nd century BC, that the Roman populace attending the theater could understand a good deal of colloquial Greek. From the time at which the Romans began to interfere in Greek affairs, about 200 BC, down to the constitution of Greece as a Roman province in 146, the knowledge of Greek in a wider and deeper sense had greatly increased in Rome and Italy.
Yeah.
So now he's establishing the supremacy of Greek.
Yes.
Before he wants to pivot, right, and say, Paul probably spoke Latin.
Yes, exactly. If you remember, a while back we did
Sure.
we did the episode on the assassination of Caesar.
Yes, that's right.
And
Ides baby.
That's the one. And we talked, the famous last words of Caesar are usually remembered by people because of Shakespeare, et tu Brute.
That's right.
But Suetonius puts it in Greek, kai su teknon,
That's
you
correct.
too, my child. And so just what would Caesar have said in his last moments?
Right.
Probably more likely to be Greek than Latin.
Yeah, I want those to be my last words. I want to speak English as my last words. I hope that they're, either Greek or Latin.
There we go.
The bottom of 338, Jeff, he kind of brings to a conclusion his little excursus about the supremacy of Greek, even in the eastern and western Mediterranean, and then he starts to make the connection. Can you read that portion?
Yes. But if the position of Greek as a second language in Italy was perfectly assured long before St. Paul's time, it is still more important to understand the positions of the various languages in the East. The situation in the East was briefly that since the time of Alexander the Great, Greek was spoken and understood in every part of his former dominions. This does not mean that the native languages had disappeared, only that they were less and less prevalent in the cities and more confined to the country districts. In Palestine, for example, Greek was one language understood by all or nearly all of the inhabitants. But there, in a country with strong national feeling, Aramaic continued to be spoken by a great many Jews. That Latin was the ordinary language of some in Palestine is proved by the inscription on the cross.
Yes.
Now, this one, I'm not sure if I want to go all the way with him.
Okay.
Because that always struck me as, couldn't Latin have been included on the inscription because it was an official document?
Well, I guess that's an important and interesting question of research. Is what's hung over across an official document?
Yeah.
No doubt Pontius Pilate, when he's reporting to his superior, right, would have written his letter in Latin and maybe included Greek. I don't know.
Right.
Or had someone write it in Latin for him. I don't know how good his Latin was. But is the thing that's hung over the criminal, is that considered an official document?
Yeah.
It seems to me that you could well be right, and I don't know the answer, but Souter's claim is fairly modest, that Latin was the ordinary language of some in Palestine.
Yeah, right.
Is proved by the inscription on the cross.
Sure.
So throughout the Gospels, there are lots of different Romans moving around.
Yes.
Centurions and so forth. You got soldiers marching around. In the Acts of the Apostles, the same thing. And if Pilate wanted to communicate to them what was going on with this particular person, it goes in Latin as well as the other two languages.
Right. I mean, Souter goes on to make the point that you see a lot more Latin inscriptions in places that were colonii, right?
Correct.
They're colonies. I think certainly that could apply to Palestine as well, right?
Now, the next paragraph seems at first sight to undercut Souter's main point, right? Because he says, this situation was brought about by the fact that the Romans never attempted to impose Latin upon their eastern provinces. This kind of stuck out at me. I'd never thought about that, right?
Yeah.
The typical way that I talk about the advance of Roman power is that they were kind of dull bureaucrats, right? That they didn't have naturally the finesse of the Greeks. They weren't naturally inclined to poetry and so forth. Mm-hmm. They learned it from the Greeks, but what they were really good at was building roads and bridges, conquering peoples, right?
Yeah.
In the way that Virgil represents them in Book 6 of the Aeneid. So I would have thought that there was at least some attempt to impose their own language preferences on subordinate peoples, but Souter says they really didn't do that.
Yeah, no, that struck me as well. I started to think about it, and I thought that, certainly one aspect of the general Roman character is one towards efficiency, too.
Correct.
So by the time they conquer
Brutal
Greece,
efficiency.
Brutal efficiency, but also in some ways practical efficiency.
Right.
And so 146, they conquer Greece. I wonder if part of it was, by that time, it was already kind of the lingua franca of the world. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's the right way to read it. He says next, where they, the Romans, found Greek in possession as the language of civilization, they left it in that position.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's kind of as though they were saying, well, these people are beneath us. I'm not going to go to the trouble to make them use Latin because what's the point of that?
Yes. Yeah. He goes on there. So from the very beginning of their connection with politics east of the Adriatic, Greek was recognized as a second official language of the Roman government. There were definite Greek equivalents for every word connected with Roman administration in the widest sense of that term. Rome corresponded with Eastern powers in Greek.
That is fascinating.
That is really interesting. Yeah.
I like this. He says there's, just to repeat, definite Greek equivalents for every word connected with Roman administration. Mm-hmm. So if you have, consul, proconsul, the tribune of the plebs, all of these terminology, Pontifex Maximus, there's a list of Greek terms that were invented to cover all of those descriptions.
Yes.
Nevertheless, their correspondence with Eastern powers, Mithridates and so forth, always in Greek.
Always in Greek.
Kind of surprising. Then he finally gets to the question, right, at the beginning of the next paragraph. Could you read that, Jeff?
Sure. What then is the place of Latin in the East? A very small one indeed. So again, here he seems
to undercut
his argument. Yeah. If we take, for instance, the occurrence of inscriptions in that language in an oriental province as a kind of index of the place of Latin in ordinary intercourse, we shall see this. There is no reason to suppose that the situation in Pontus south of the Black Sea was in any way exceptional, and I have selected that province as a test simply because I happen to be reading the inscriptions recently published in the third volume of the excellent Studia Pontica of J.G.C. Anderson and others. I thought this was also just very, very kind of colloquial, kind of.
But I don't think he's flexing.
No, I don't think he's flexing at all. It's very personable. He's like, hey, I happen to be reading this.
Correct.
It's really interesting. Let's use it.
Right.
Yeah.
I thought first he was going to talk about the Studia Pontica, right? The inscriptions in that part, as you said, of the Mediterranean south of the Black Sea, because it's not too far from Tarsus.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. Right.
And Tarsus, where Paul was born and raised, was one of the 3 university cities of the ancient East.
Right.
And famous for its Stoic studies.
Yeah.
So I thought he's going to be mentioning Pontus because I don't believe Tarsus is in Pontus. It's in Cilicia, but it's kind of close.
It's close. It's in the broader neighborhood.
That's right. But that's not why he does it. He just happened to be reading it. So what is the upshot of that?
This is really interesting. Again, it would seem
to undercut.
He says this work, Studia Pontica, contains a complete collection of all Greek and Latin inscriptions yet discovered in certain districts of Pontus. And then get this: out of 361 inscriptions, only 7 are in Latin. In other words, there is only 1 Latin inscription for every 52 Greek.
That's pretty rare.
So this, I can add a glance.
Is this evidence that Paul spoke Latin?
It seems to be quite counter to
that. It certainly isn't evidence that he encountered a lot of Latin inscriptions.
No.
When he saw the inscriptions, he encountered them in Greek. Now, the tradition, of course, is that although Paul was born in Tarsus and spent his boyhood there, he would have been in Jerusalem perhaps from the age of 12 or something like that, studying under Gamaliel. So I think, he used the Studia Pontica. Something in Judea might be better. But
yeah.
And he does reference that when he says next, if we accept this as a sort of ratio for the eastern provinces and an extended study of others in Asia Minor as well as some study of those in Syria gives much the same impression, we shall see that Latin held a place of no great importance. That is when it comes to inscriptions.
Yes. If we examine these Latin inscriptions themselves, he goes on, we shall generally find that they refer to Roman soldiers. No doubt the Latin inscription on the cross was intended specifically for their benefit.
There you go.
Okay, all right. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Besides the soldiers who formed part of the regular garrisons of imperial provinces, there were the citizen soldiers and other settlers of the Roman coloniae of garrison cities throughout the East who constituted the aristocracy of the communities in which they dwelt. It seems to be suggesting that Latin functioned as a kind of common tongue for a lot of these soldiers being resettled elsewhere.
For sure.
Okay.
Yep, the Julia cohort, which was in Palestine, as we know from Acts.
Yeah.
We're getting close to the end of the article, actually, just a couple pages, and we might be asking, okay, so Souter, where's the evidence? Right?
Right.
Where's the evidence? Right. Let's continue. Souter says, it would be hazardous to argue from the fact that Paul was a Roman citizen that he must necessarily have spoken Latin. But if we follow him throughout his journeys in the eastern half of the Roman Empire, we shall note the large number of coloniae which he visited, where the most influential people would be most influenced by Latin. The following list is, I believe, that's probably a little bit modest on Souter's part, complete. Pisidian Antioch, Lystra, Troas, Philippi, Corinth, Ptolemais. This does not, of course, exhaust the places where Latin would be useful. Sir W. M. Ramsay's St. Paul the Traveler and the Roman Citizen has shown once for all how persistently Roman Paul's attitude was, and that we might almost say that he avoided places which from the Roman point of view were unimportant. So I have this Ramsay book. I haven't read all of it, but we should do an episode on it at some point as well, because it's freely in the public domain, right? It's a masterpiece of scholarship on Paul and his, as Souter says, Roman attitudes.
So because of that, so he visited lots of these places that were these coloniae.
Right.
He seems
which is a settlement, right?
Yes.
Roman settlement.
Right. He has what Souter identifies as a kind of a Roman attitude, and maybe even a preference for traveling to and through places that were kind of distinctly Romanized.
Correct. So would Paul stop off in Jenison if he were coming through Grand Rapids?
No way.
Would he visit Belding?
Do you think he'd skip over Jenison for sure?
I think he would maybe assign someone to Jenison, right? Titus, go preach in Jenison. We want the celery farmers and their children, their winkles, to hear the gospel.
Hang around Meyer, maybe?
Maybe.
Yeah.
But he's going on somewhere else, right? Paul's going to go to, Cadillac, Flint, maybe not Cadillac, Flint, Detroit.
Yeah.
That's what Ramsay is saying, and Souter is endorsing that. Mm-hmm. He seems to have had a predilection for places that were considered important.
Yeah.
It could have been an actual strategy, right? Not to limit preaching of the gospel to metropoles, but to start there.
Yes.
And then assign others to the smaller places.
Now, this piece of evidence that he goes on to report, I find even more convincing, where he says Paul is the only Greek writer who uses Latin forms of particular Greek words.
Philopasioi and Illyricon.
But Souter ends his article by saying that it's Paul's association with and the time spent in Corinth that actually produces the best evidence that he almost assuredly knew Latin, could speak Latin.
Yeah. So I'd like to deal with that. I don't want to miss, now that I think about it, the little point he says right above that, which is a comment that Paul makes in Romans 15. Mm-hmm. In Romans 15, verses 24 and 28, he says, I want to go to Spain in order to preach. Now, there are two traditions of the death of Paul, right? The prevalent one is that he died in Rome, probably in 65, maybe 66.
Under the Neronian persecution.
Exactly. Yep. But there is a second tradition that he succeeded in going to Spain and died there and preached the gospel there. And it's based on this reference in Romans 15. So Souter says, the same author, too, meaning Ramsay, has well pointed out that the mere intention of Paul to preach in Spain is sufficient proof that he had a good command of the Latin tongue.
Yeah.
Greek was probably not understood there except in one or two coast towns like Emporii, which were themselves Greek colonies. But it is in connection with the primarily Greek city Corinth that we get the strongest evidence that Paul could speak Latin.
Right. So before we dive into that, just a summary. So the further west you go, the more common Latin is.
Exactly. So if the more rare is Greek.
Yes. And so if Paul had his eyes on Spain, to be an effective missionary, he would have had to have known Latin.
Now, two counter-arguments, though, two potential objections. He could have used an interpreter.
True.
No doubt the gospel was preached through interpreters often, like the story that Thomas went to India.
Yeah.
I assume that he didn't know the Indian languages and used an interpreter, right?
Yep.
The second explanation is the charism, right? The gift of polylalia, right? At Pentecost, at least traditionally understood, was that Paul had the gift of speaking different languages, right? Because in Acts chapter 2, they heard preaching in their own tongues,
right.
People from all over. So that I don't find that one as persuasive as the first one, that is through an interpreter.
Yeah.
But it's certainly possible that he continued to exercise that spiritual gift of preaching in different languages.
Yeah. I mean, the first counter is kind of the practical,
right,
historical one. The second one is a bit more mystical.
Correct.
But that's very interesting.
Supernatural.
Yes.
Do you want to give some of that Corinth evidence then at the bottom of 341 before we finish up Souter and head to Mahoney?
Sure. Corinth, as we have said, was a colonia, and therefore is a certain very important proportion of the population spoke and understood Latin. If we try to make a list of the names of Corinthian Christians known to Paul which have survived, we shall find half the number to be Latin. Aquila, Priscilla, Titius Justus, Crispus, Fortunatus, Gaius, who may be just another name for Eustace, Quartus, Lucius, Tertius. The proportion in the case of the Roman Christians enumerated in the last chapter of the Epistle to the Romans is much smaller, about a quarter of the total number. So he's using kind of just the list, that sampling of names of the people that Paul knew in Corinth is evidence of their evidence of Latinity.
That they were probably native Latin speakers.
Yes.
However, they also spoke Greek, as we've already established. So why couldn't Paul communicate with them in Greek?
I suppose he could have. I think he's making the argument that since Corinth was an important colony,
right,
that probably just the mere presence of Latin speakers was probably more prevalent in that city.
Sure.
And for him to be successful at what he was doing, again, if he's not working with an interpreter,
right,
he had to have some knowledge of Latin.
Yes. Okay. Do you want to continue? Where he says
sure.
This might?
Yes, this might be perhaps might be sufficient to show that Paul must have spoken Latin in Corinth. But a passage in the first epistle to that church would make it indubitable if we could accept a well-attested variant in chapter 14, verse 18. And Dave, could you pick it up there?
Sure. So it says, the accepted reading of chapter 14, verse 18 now is panton humon malon glossis, or glosse in the singular, lalo. The Revised Version translates, I speak with tongues more than you all. Says Souter, and this must be right, as the context clearly shows that the reference is to glossolali.
Like speaking in tongues is
That's correct.
A spiritual gift.
That's right.
Yes.
The singular glosse, probably an older reading than the plural glossis, offered a difficulty to a Western simplifier of the Pauline text, probably as early as the 2nd century, and he ejected the malon. So what he's saying is someone's copying this portion of the book of Acts, and they're doing so, this Western simplifier, as early as the 2nd century, and he stumbled over the plural form glossis, tongues. And he thought, well, that should be singular, right? So he inserted the singular word glosse in there. The latter form of text, says Souter, has slender Greek attestation, but is supported by practically all the Latin authorities, including the Vulgate. The only possible meaning of this reading is that Paul could speak all the languages of his Corinthian converts. So here's the conclusion. Paul, of course, did not mean this. In other words, Paul was not saying, I can speak all the languages of my converts.
Right.
He was talking about the spiritual gift of glossolali. But, says Souter, the fact that an early reviser represented him as saying it, joined to the cumulative effect of the small points already brought forward, makes it hardly possible to doubt that one of the unique sum of St. Paul's qualifications for the apostleship to the Gentiles, was a command of the Latin tongue.
I love how that like a mistranslation or a mistake
right.
can open the door.
That's right.
To a really interesting conclusion. Yeah,
because the mistake in the copying means, well, the authors, the gentleman copying it, I don't really understand this. It must mean X.
Yeah,
and that shows us the general understanding
the
of the time.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that is really fascinating.
Yeah, I love it. But Souter's not the last word on this.
No.
Right? So there is some important kind of counter arguments.
Correct.
And there's an article that...
Yes. So there's an article in a journal called Paul's World, not Wayne's World, but...
Paul's World.
Paul's World.
Okay.
And it was written by one Stanley E. Porter in 2008. And the title of the article is The Languages That Paul Did Not Speak.
Oh, okay.
Shot across the bow. Now, we don't have our hands on this one yet, but when it comes into our possession, maybe a future episode, we will deal with Porter's article. It looks like it's only about 18 pages.
Yeah.
And he's going to try to update the scholarship on this very question, did Paul speak Latin?
But what was the year of that article again?
That was 2008.
Okay.
So, I mean, it itself was 17 years ago, but, I mean, compared to Souter, it was just yesterday.
Right.
So that'll be fun to look at once we have access to it.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of languages Paul didn't speak,
yes,
it's time for the ads.
All right. Jeff, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Are you ready for art that truly speaks to your story?
Always.
Okay, meet Della, a Tucson-based oil painter who captures the people, places, and moments you cherish with breathtaking detail. She then lets them go, but she captures them in paint.
Yes.
She's showcased her work in multiple galleries, illustrated books, and is often commissioned for standout projects. See her current works for sale at her website, dellachelpka.art. DELLACHELPKA.ART. To find your inspiration, visit dellachelpka.art and use the coupon code
Apelles.
Apelles? What in the world is that?
That is the name of the most prominent painter of Greco-Roman antiquity.
Fascinating. How do we spell it?
That's APELLES.
And if we use it, what kind of discount do we get off of our inspiring art?
10%.
Wow. Check it out.
This episode of Ad Nauseam is also brought to you by the wonderful folks at Hackett Publishing. These are guys that have been with us since the very beginning of our little podcast here. They are one of the few people out there that are keeping the flame alive.
They are
doing what we're trying to do with this podcast is keeping the classics alive in a erudite, approachable, affordable, and attractive manner. So since 1970, the year of my birth, Hackett Publishing has been in business, bringing these wonderful volumes of the classics and from all of the corners of academia to the public in an approachable, affordable, wonderful fashion. So, Dave, I know that our listeners are interested in building their own personal library, and shopping with Hackett is a great way to do it.
Absolutely.
And save some money along the way. So, Dave, what should they do if they want to do this?
We want the listeners to go to hackettpublishing.com, HACKETT Publishing. We would like them to check out the many offerings that Hackett has to build one's classics library. Put your selections into the little grocery satchel, and then at checkout, enter this coupon code AN2025. When you do so, you will get several wonderful things. You'll get the satisfaction of the knowledge that you're building your library. You'll also get the opportunity to support this entertaining, hopefully an educational podcast, and you will receive 20% off your entire order and
free shipping.
Check it out. This episode is also brought to you by our good friend Mark Helweg, the entrepreneur who was tired of the mass-produced coffee, which the masses, the hoi polloi, were forced to drink. Mm-hmm. So some years ago, he thought, I can do better, and indeed he could. He invented the Ratio 8, the first automatic pour-over machine. High-quality coffee, the same that you would get from a seasoned barista, but it is conveniently in your own kitchen, but it looks ugly, doesn't it, sitting on the countertop?
Quite the contrary, Dave.
What?
These things are works of art. Yeah, I have the 8 on my countertop. I used to have the 6, and I have the 4 in my office, so I have experience with all of their high-class, top-shelf machines, and they all are great-looking and just produce a great cup of coffee every single time.
That's right. Hey, are you ready for a coffee machine that speaks to your story?
Wait. Are we cross a...
It's kind of like Sahoney or Mahouter.
Right.
Putting these two ads together. I love the Ratio 8. Just this morning, I used the 4 to brew up a great batch of coffee.
Yep.
The 4 is more attainable, you might say. It's not as expensive. Now,
that's right.
To buy a high-quality coffee machine seems like a sound investment. You could put together thousands of dollars going to Bar Stucks and those kinds of places and not get good coffee, or you can buy one nice machine which will last for an extremely long time. Yes. And that's what we recommend that you do. So please go to this website.
Ratiocoffee.com. That's RATIO coffee.com/ad nauseam.
And then after they search around and they select what they want, what do they need to do in terms of coupon code?
They can type in this coupon code ANRatio2025. and that will get you $20 off your entire order.
Check it out. All right, Jeff, time to turn a corner now. We leave behind Souter and we go to the second of our two brilliant articles, the forms you really need to know. Now, I like how really is in scare quotes.
Yes.
The forms you really need to know. The author is Anne Mahoney. This was published in The Classical Outlook, Volume 81, Number 3, Spring 2004, published by the American Classical League, and it's a brief 6 pages, or 5 pages, page 101 through 105. Now, Jeff, before we get into the knit and grit, I'd like to know your first impression.
I thought this was really interesting and very, very helpful. And lots of pie charts.
You like pie charts?
I like the pie charts, right. And I mean, I felt what she was saying when she talks about how much time, intro grammars of Greek have you learning subjunctive and optative.
Latin too.
Latin, or learning the supine and the vocative. And she's saying, if you break it down, a lot of those forms are just not very common at all. And so she makes a case for it, like at least in like the first year, let's focus on what shows up the most.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
I thought this was really, really well done.
Absolutely. It was actually one Patrick M. Owens who first pointed this article out to me.
Okay, yeah.
And despite that fact, I love the article. Just giving you some love, Patrick. I'm going to see him this weekend, actually.
Fantastic.
So down in Texas. So Anne Mahoney is the Associate Teaching Professor of Classical Studies at Tufts University. Where is Tufts?
It's out east somewhere, right?
Out east somewhere.
Massachusetts?
I think so.
Yep.
Tufts, something like that.
Yeah.
So her research areas of interest are classical tradition and reception, linguistics, ancient drama, ancient mathematics, ancient Greek, Latin, and Sanskrit language as well.
Wow.
She got her PhD from Boston University in 2000, an MA also from Boston, an MA in mathematics from Boston, and an a BA in mathematics and economics from Fordham.
An interesting combination.
So this is a really well-educated scholar.
Yes.
She began, says her CV, as a mathematician working on logic. After graduate school, she worked as a software engineer for some years while also reviving her high school Latin and learning other ancient languages. She returned to graduate school in classics and first came to Tufts as a member of the Perseus Project. You know the Perseus Digital Library?
Right. It's based in Tufts.
It's brilliant.
Yeah,
her scholarship centers on meter and poetics and on Neo-Latin, especially after the Renaissance. She teaches historical linguistics in Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit, and she has revived the mathematics department's course on ancient mathematics. What an interesting individual. A savant, you might say.
Really quite interesting. And if our listeners are not familiar with this Perseus project, which you should check out if you haven't, out of Tufts, it contains a searchable, hypertext clickable corpus of all extant works in Greek and Latin.
Well said.
And so, Mahoney at Tufts makes a really clever use of having all of that at her fingertips.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's get on to the pie charts.
Yeah.
So she says, Greek and Latin words have lots of forms. Every year, teachers present them and students memorize them, hoping to recognize them later on when they appear, quote, in the wild, phrase I use all the time, in actual texts. But are all these forms equally important? Certainly not. Experienced readers of Latin know that supines are relatively uncommon, for example, so no one teaches the supine in the first weeks of Latin 1. Makes sense. The present indicative active, on the other hand, is obviously essential, but where do we draw the line between uncommon and essential forms? Jeff, could you pick it up there?
Yeah, she says, I began to wonder about this question when I was assigned to teach a section of Greek using Ellsworth. This is an attractive book with authentic readings and a sensible vocabulary, but I was surprised to find no discussion of subjunctives, optatives, or imperatives. How would my students be able to read real Greek after this book?
Good question.
Yeah.
She then says, but my intuition about Greek verbs was wrong. Refreshing. In fact, in real Greek texts, the subjunctive and optative appear much less frequently than I thought, and I had formed my incorrect impression mostly because of their prominence in other textbooks. After all, many textbooks quite rationally devote much space to teaching the more difficult forms or constructions, or those which have no obvious parallels in English. Now, that's an important point.
Yeah.
As a result, subjunctives and optatives are highly salient to readers of textbooks. I decided to see just how necessary these forms were in real Greek. Given the resources of the Perseus corpus and tools, I counted forms for Latin as well. In what follows, I will discuss the relative frequencies of verb and noun forms in Latin and Greek literature and how this information can help beginning and intermediate readers and their teachers.
I would say, not to mention future textbook writers.
Absolutely.
How to organize the whole approach. Right?
Although I don't know if they have taken her lessons to heart. I can't say.
Yeah.
Can you say a few words, Jeff, about her method? Now, this can get kind of deep in the weeds, but some little understanding of her methodology is crucial.
The following column, she says she analyzed the entire Perseus corpus, 2 million north of 700,000 words of Latin and over 4 million words of Greek text.
That's right.
And so she used that, basically data crunched them all.
That's right.
And she it spit out these pie charts and said, well, what's the percentage of things showing up in the
That's
indicative
right.
or the subjunctive?
In 2004, before AI.
Yeah.
So this is hard work.
Yeah, this is incredible.
Yeah, and she says that frequency counts and lists of the most common words for Greek and Latin have always been available. There's the one by Lodge, 1912, Cheadle, 1939, Else, 1952. There's Owen and Goodspeed's Homeric Vocabulary, 1969, so on and so forth. You can always find these, but she wants to kind of check, are these accurate in terms of frequency? So she looks at the forms, like you mentioned.
Right, and she wants to kind of get these out of their kind of specialized sections and get it in, boil it down to intro text. Like,
that's right.
What is the best starting point for someone just getting into these languages?
Right. So she says, for Latin, I considered the text on the College Board, AP Syllabi, Virgil's Aeneid, Ovid's Amores and Metamorphoses, Horace's Odes and Satires, Catullus, and Cicero's Procylio, a selection from Caesar and Cicero, Plautus and Terence, and the Vulgate as a proxy for later Latin generally. For Greek, I considered tragedy, Homer, Aristophanes, and the New Testament. So those of our listeners who are interested in New Testament studies can be grateful that her conclusions count for the New Testament as well.
Yeah.
So what were some of her results, Jeff?
Yeah, so she writes, the nominative and accusative are by far the most common forms in both languages, with the Greek genitive not far behind. Vocatives, on the other hand, are relatively uncommon. The dative in Greek is also less common, which will not surprise anyone who knows that it is no longer used in modern Greek. So I thought that was really quite interesting.
The dative was surprising. I would have thought that the dative would have finished higher than some of these other cases.
But no.
No. So she continues, in Greek, the vocative is the third most frequent case in Homer and Aristophanes, and is fourth ahead of the dative in the tragedians.
Wow.
I've never had a textbook devoted entirely to the vocative.
No.
And one of the reasons, of course, is that in both languages, the vocative, singular and plural, is usually identical to the nominative.
Right.
So you don't even really have to memorize it as a separate case most of the time.
It's very simple. Yeah.
Yeah. So she says, these are all genres, that is Homer, Aristophanes, tragedians, in which people address each other by name frequently, so this is hardly a surprise.
Yeah.
Then she goes on to verb forms, Jeff.
Yes,
what does she say there?
She says verbs are more complicated than nouns. And so she groups verbs independently by tense, mood, and by voice. In both languages, the present tense, the indicative mood, and the active voice are by far the most common, which doesn't surprise me. Right? The pluperfect is relatively uncommon. Future perfect, decidedly rare. And then she gives these tables for example, in her... Can
you go with the Latin noun form, the first pie chart?
Yeah, the Latin noun forms, the nominative makes up about 24% of usage, the accusative close behind 22%, ablative 15%, vocative 13%, ahead of the genitive, close to 13%, dative 11%.
That's right.
And so, the dative there bringing up the rear.
That's right. So if you know the nominative, accusative, and ablative, those three cases, you have over 61% of all noun forms for Latin.
Incredible.
Then what about Greek noun forms? Any surprises there?
We'll see. Accusative and nominative, once again, taking up the bulk. Accusative ahead of the nominative.
That's right.
About 29% to 24%.
Which suggests that more verbs have stated objects than they have stated subjects.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting implication.
And then where with the in third place, where the Latin noun forms put the ablative, the genitive shows up.
That's right. So accusative, nominative, and genitive together, that's 71% of all noun forms.
Right.
So don't even spend too much time on the dative or vocative.
Right. Yep.
Unless you have a lot of free time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
What about Latin tenses?
Latin tenses?
The third chart here, the third pie graph chart thingy.
So yes, the present tense makes up a full 54% of all forms
for Latin verbs.
Okay. And then followed by the perfect. If you put the perfect tense and the present tense together, you're over 80%.
That's right.
That's amazing.
83%.
Amazing.
So I would spend 80% of my time making sure students know, as I actually try to do in my classes, the present and the perfect, and the future perfect. It's vanishingly rare. Look at it.
0.9%.
0.9. You're more likely to see a purple rhinoceros, right, walk into your coffee shop than to encounter a future perfect.
It's true. I mean, it's similar.
Maybe not that rare.
But I mean, it's similar in English. I mean, when's the last time you used the future perfect?
I don't know. I will have not remembered after this discussion. Latin moods. What about moods? This is our fourth chart.
Latin moods. Yes. So indicative, 44%, followed by participles, 24%. So that puts us right at over 2/3.
That's correct.
Forms,
67% of all verbal forms. And she does explain how she knows the participle is not a mood, but she has to class them somehow.
Right.
So indicative and participle together, like you said, 67, almost 68% of all verb forms.
Then it drops off.
Yeah, the infinitive is only 7%, which is kind of surprising.
And then the gerund and gerundive, I'm a little disappointed just because that's a personal favorite of mine.
You like the gerund?
Yes,
gerund or the gerundive? Which one?
I like the gerundive.
You like the gerundive?
Yes, and that's less than 3%.
Yeah, the gerundive must be loved by you.
Yes.
2.8.
Yep.
But people spend a lot of time on it. And understandably, because the other stuff's easier, but in another sense, not understandable because being less frequent, it's not as important.
Yes, exactly.
Then we go on to Greek tenses. The present tense, 259, what is this? 259 million occurrence?
Yeah.
The aorist tense, 155 million. The two together constitute over almost 75% of all verb tenses.
Yes.
So you learn the present and the aorist, you've got it. The future tense, a surprising 4.8%. And the pluperfect and future perfect, as you would expect, just vanishingly small.
Tiny.
So, Jeff, this brings us to analysis and conclusions, which I think are really the meat of the article.
Yes.
As much as I like the pie charts, I think this is really helpful. Can you read a little bit of that for us, please?
Right. So Mahoney writes, we can draw several conclusions from these figures. The most important tenses in Latin are clearly the present and the perfect. The imperfect and future are much less frequent, and the other tenses of the perfect system are almost negligible. The difficult verbal nouns and adjectives, the gerund, gerundive, and supine, are uncommon enough that we may wonder whether they were difficult for the Romans, too.
Isn't that interesting?
I love that. Yeah. Active forms are considerably more common than passive, but not overwhelmingly so. Indicatives are far more common than subjunctives.
Yes.
So what about Greek? You want to pick
it up
there?
I just want to make a comment on that, if I may, and that is that I often tell my students when I'm trying to get them accustomed to the passive voice in Latin, when I want the passive voice to be accustomed to by them, I'll say something like, the Romans had a decided preference for the passive voice. I see now that's a little bit of an exaggeration. A better way to say it is the Romans liked the passive voice much more than we do, but they still prefer the active in most instances.
Yes.
Okay. In Greek, says Mahoney, similarly, the present and the simple past, the aorist, are the most frequent tenses, almost 75%, with the others far behind. The Greek future perfect is so rare that students may never even see it, depending on what text they choose to read. The active voice is much more common than the middle and passive put together, and the middle is more common than the passive. The subjunctive and optative in Greek are even less frequent than the Latin subjunctive.
I remember my own schooling in learning Greek, sweating it out over the subjunctive and optative.
Oh, yeah.
And Mahoney would have told me, hey,
don't
salt.
Sweat it.
Yeah. Right.
Now, I would like to say, if we want to anticipate some Moss Method stuff, I have simplified this greatly on Greek Quick Sheet number 3, but we'll save that for later.
Sounds good.
She makes a good caveat, though, at the top of the next column, where she says, of course, these are aggregate figures, and as noted above, ambiguous forms are simply weighted, not properly parsed. Individual texts may vary significantly from the pattern. So if you're reading Catullus 5, for example, vivamus me lesbiatque memus, it has 15 verb forms. 6 present subjunctive active, 3 present indicative active, 2 present infinitive active, and 1 each gerundive, present imperative active, future indicative active, perfect subjunctive. So she's saying, of course, any given example could be a defeater of the general pattern, as you would expect, because these are averages.
Yeah, so each author basically needs his or her own dictionary.
Correct.
Right?
But she says in conclusion, the teacher, realizing that the verbs in this poem may be difficult, may choose to remind the class about subjunctives as part of pre-reading. That, to me, makes a lot more sense than devoting an entire unit, you might say, to something that only occurs 5% of the time.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense to me. All right, Dave, so what kind of final conclusions does Mahoney make as we get to the end?
Yeah, so she says, the traditional order of presentation for Latin in books like Wheelock or Jenny et al. Make perfect sense. Books like these have the subjunctive for Latin 2 and perhaps defer the gerund, gerundive, and supine all the way to Latin 3. Intensive texts, such as Moreland and Flesher, 1978 for Latin, or Hansen and Quinn, 1992 for Greek, teach the more difficult forms early. For example, presenting the Greek subjunctive and optative in Unit 3 out of 20.
Wow.
But this may not be necessary, as the subjunctive and optative together make up less than 9% of all verb forms.
Very interesting.
Touché.
Yes.
I think Anne has them dead to rights there.
I think so, too.
The final paragraph, she says, I will still ensure that my elementary Greek students have at least heard of the subjunctive and optative. Yeah, I know there's a subjunctive, they might say. But now I know I need not worry about those moods in the first year. Let them master the indicative, participles, and infinitives, and they will be well on their way. So that wraps it up, Jeff.
Yep.
We have a few items to take care of, and then everyone's going to stick around, right, for the preview of next episode, as well as the gustatory parting shot?
Of course, yes.
Okay.
But we got some business to take care of, so I'm sure that our listeners out there, many of them would be interested in learning some Latin and Greek.
I would sure hope so.
And I think, Dave, you can help them.
I believe I can. I have taken all my years of studying and teaching Greek and Latin. I am, an experienced student, I think, is the way to approach it. We're all students of these kinds of things. Some have made more mistakes than others. That would be me. Go to latinperdiem.com. Check out my Greek courses, which take you from
neophyte to erudite.
Thank you, Dr. Winkle. Or my Latin courses, which take you ab initio, from the ground up, in learning these languages. We've had some wonderful students join these courses recently. They hear about it on the podcast, and they say, I want to read a Latin verse like Dr. Winkle. I want to handle the Greek New Testament like Dr. Noe. I'm signing up for one of those classes. Go to the website, check it out. We have lots of different offerings, and use this coupon code 10+10PLUS, and you will get 10% off your entire order.
Sounds great.
Yes, Jeff, we need to thank some folks who help us put this show together. Who are they?
Of course, as always, our wonderful engineer, the wonderful Mishka, who gets us turned around so quickly and gives us that nice audio sheen that our audience has come to expect. And also this guitarist, this Jeff Sheets. You hear snippets of his songs Thrill Seeker and Rush Hour throughout the episode. To be able to play like this guy. Hey, Dave, if they want to get in touch with us,
yes.
If they have a question, they want a shout out, they have a corrigendum.
Oh, my. Again.
What should they do?
They should write to Jeff, all corrigenda. Go to jeff@adnauseam.com. Don't forget there is a V in ad nauseam, or you can write to Dave.
That's also dave@adnauseam.com. Don't forget that V once again.
You can pick up a Quai Nocent Docent ad nauseam t-shirt, which shows that you're taking in the classics.
And keeping them down.
Or you can get a hat, something like that. You won't regret it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget, we would like to hear from you for episode 200. So make a tiny little audio recording, 30 seconds, a couple minutes if you want. Tell us what questions you want answered, what you like about the show, what you least like about the show, why you'd like to have breakfast with Dr. Winkle or lunch, and record that in some manageable audio. Doesn't need to be high quality. Send it to dave@adnauseam.com. We'll put it together, hopefully, for a nice clip show.
Yes. And Dave, next week?
Yes. Well, we're going to finish one of the two series that we have had running in tandem for a while now.
Yep.
And that is the wonderful book by Mr. Carl Richard, The Golden Age of the Classics in America. We're going to deal with the final chapter, which is on slavery in the antebellum period, how it interacts with classics, and the epilogue.
Sounds great.
So that will be number 198.
Mm-hmm.
And last, Jeff,
yes,
I think you have our gustatory parting shots for today.
This comes from an online post by one Nathan W. Pyle. What's the name of that wonderful cartoon?
Strange Planet.
Strange Planet, yes.
As a fellow cartoonist, Jeff, a syndicated cartoonist as you were, a comic strip writer,
yes,
you must admire this guy.
I love
He's
it.
doing great work.
It is really
funny stuff.
Really funny stuff. But he posts this. I wish more foods were named like cream of wheat.
What's the list?
You can see the example. Soup of tomato, juice of orange, sauce of tartar, my favorite, pie of pumpkin, food cake of angels, salad of Caesar.
There's the classics reference.
There we go. Crispies of rice, bread of garlic, rolls of pizza, strudel of toaster, fries of sweet potato, and last but not least, corn of candy.
Corn of candy. Cream of wheat. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.